Every now and then a new video game releases and tries to attempt something bold. And all of a sudden people start freaking out. Hashtags, tweets, articles that would perhaps make you think, oh, some shit's gone down. But for about 99.9% of these outbursts, there's a tiny flaw in these arguments.
It was bollocks.
That's right, today we're talking about controversies in video games, specifically ones that run under the category of
everything is sexist, everything's offensive to people like me. Let's go through the checklist, it's all misogyny.
While the internet today would have you believe that it's an insult if you simply breathe and function properly, I think it's worth starting a few decades back, just a handful of them throughout the years, picked by me, just to see if verified Twitter accounts have actually been around for as long as there's been interactive entertainment.
Who do you think you are?
The first known gaming controversy on record erupted in 1973 with a game called Gotcha. The premise was that you would have two players, one would be running, the other one would try to catch them, on this maze that would constantly change up. The problem people had wasn't necessarily the gameplay itself, it was the arcade cabinet. Traditionally, the Atari arcade cabinet relied on joysticks for the controls, but upon Gotcha's release, they brought out a new production that changed the controls to these two pink rubber mouses that people called out for resembling women's chest bumps. The other thing that really didn't do any favours for this game was the poster. Now I just want to say two things on this. One, this is terribly photoshopped, might I just say. Like, what the hell? Whoever made that needs to be fired. The lady's left arm is faded out, and one of the controls on the Atari is shining through. I mean, that's 1 out of 10, dude. And two, the obvious, what I think you've already picked up for yourself. It's not a very good look, and it gave the critics a lot more ammunition to reinforce their argument. End result, Atari changed the controls back to the joysticks, the game failed to catch on, and the game earned its name in the history books as the boob game. Moving on a few years into a time where Atari wanted to expand their audience by developing a new format of games, adult games. Among those was a game called Custer's Revenge. Now legend has it that General George Custer was shot and killed at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and then in 1982 a new development team called Mystique said, psych, the man's not dead, so in short, his quote-unquote revenge plan is to kidnap this Native American woman, tie her to a pole, strip down to his hat, boots and his bandana because, I don't know, I've asked the same question about the were-rabbit from Wallace and Gromit. Like, why the hell does he have a bow tie on? I don't know. The objective of the game is to reach the woman and have, intercourse without consent, all while avoiding the arrows. Looking at everything else I'm going to be mentioning in this video, Custer's Revenge is probably the most extreme it really got, because back then video games really didn't provide you with the context to justify the situation, it just put you in them. So it was inevitable that someone subjectively could have gone maybe a step too far. And honestly, I think this game would have been completely forgotten about if it weren't for the controversy. Like, if we do a quick Google search, eBay gave this 5 out of 5! And the train has just arrived. Oh, look who's driving. Now it's time to move into the 90s with two games that would release that would start franchises that are lasting today. Mortal Kombat and Pokemon. Starting with Mortal Kombat. So when it arrived on the arcade in August 1992, it scared the shit out of parents due to its very graphic fatalities. If only they could have gotten a glimpse of what it would look like 20 years onwards. Attempting to challenge the Street Fighter series, Mortal Kombat's gruesome finishers was a signature asset to its gameplay that set itself apart. Gamers appreciated it. Parents, not so much. This resulted in a lot of negative publicity, but at this point controversy was nothing new to games, so it really had zero effect on its reputation. But things got a little interesting when the game left the arcade and arrived on the home consoles. I want to talk specifically about Nintendo SNES and the Sega Genesis. These companies decided to censor, or more better word, tone down the graphic fatalities and give it a rating of MA13. I guess perhaps it was to comfort concerned parents not to be as hesitant to buy Mortal Kombat for their children. But Sega, the cheeky bastards, had a plan. That was by implementing a cheat code players could dial in at the game's main menu to unlock all of the savage violence. And then word got out on it, and the sales for Mortal Kombat on the Sega Genesis went kaboom. From what I could find, Mortal Kombat sold around 3 million copies on the home consoles. and the Sega Genesis accounted for about 89% of them. This obviously landed back in the headlines, but this time it made it all the way to the United States Congress. Former Senators Joseph Lieberman and Herb Kohl were leading the charge to pass on a bill that would require all gaming content to be approved by the government. In a response, the gaming industry got together and formed the International Digital Software Association, which would later go on to be the organisers of E3. Now in 1994, they made a proposal to the government to create their own rating system to be placed on the game's packaging to inform both consumers and retailers the maturity of its content. It was accepted, and by September 1994, the ERSB rating that we know as today was created. Not that it's had much of a big influence, but it's fascinating stuff. Moving on now to Pokemon. Now, if you thought upcoming games like the new Call of Duty or Cyberpunk are being dragged through the mud for no reason, listen to this one. So there was that famous speech I'm sure you've all seen from the preacher who made it clear that Pokemon was the work of the devil. Wow! The argument has actually survived to this day, matter of fact. In 2016, when Pokemon Go came out, there were certain individuals who felt Christians were being targeted because Pokemons were being located in their churches.
That Pokemon Go is primarily, the demons are primarily being located inside churches. You're going to have people coming to your church, walking in the doors looking for a Pokemon devil. And there are going to be pastors who are going to say, well, I think this is wonderful. I think this is great. It's bringing people to our church. You don't understand the level of spiritual warfare that's being played against you.
The character Jinx that people criticize for her. Hold on a sec. Just to be sure, I want to get this right. A female only... What? No, never mind. So, she was criticized for being a negative depiction of African Americans, which later drove the developers to change her racial identity to purple. But the most hilarious of all of them is the Pokemon versus PETA situation in 2012 to 2013. Now, PETA, known as the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, have a tradition of releasing flash parody games of popular franchises to promote their cause. So when they turned their attention to Pokemon, they condemned it for encouraging animal abuse. And then in 2012, they released a flash parody game called Pokemon Black and Blue, where the description is as follows. For generations, Pokemon has suffered at the hands of their cruel trainers. Help PETA free Pikachu and his Pokemon friends as they struggle for Pokemon. There's even a fight move called Group Hug, where Pikachu literally just hugs one of the trainers that breaks their defense, and there's another one called Protest where he just holds up a sign saying lover not fighter, and even when you win, your opponent doesn't die. You just like start having some kind of debate. Oh come on, you know that's not a valid point. PETA has also targeted the Nintendo brands. They made a game called Mario Kills Tanukis, and the reason for that is they were trying to put forward the point that Mario, or allowing Mario to equip a cosmetic item called the Tanuki suit, promoted the killings of the raccoon dogs for their fur. And just in case you're wondering, the reason why this beef between PETA and Pokemon lasted until 2013 was because PETA released a follow-up, or put it more professionally, an ambitious sequel. Now into the new millennium. Now at this point, the original concepts for games was becoming much more harder and uncommon. So rather than that, games were just evolving the genres. So naturally the controversies were just more of the same. So here's just a few I've picked out for discussion. You had the Manhunt series. Due to its violent content, its M rating was rejected from countries such as Germany, South Korea, Ireland, New Zealand, and even the UK, but only temporarily. You had Fox News go after Mass Effect for their sex scenes, which they dubbed the headlines Sex Box. Resident Evil 5 decided that in order to make it feel like we're in Africa, they're going to depict the people's background in a proper manner. People didn't take that very well. The GTA series has been criticised for every freaking thing you can think of. The hot coffee mod from San Andreas, the evil stunts players can pull off due to the game's freedom, and the torture scene from GTA 5.
You get to choose what torture device you get to use on the random brown guy. So you can either electrocute him or waterboard him or pull his teeth out. It's like nice that you get to choose how to hate.
For your information, I hit that man with a wrench. But the one that takes the cake from me in my mind was 6 Days in Fallujah. This was to be a story-driven third-person tactical shooter. developed by Atomic Games and to be published by Konami. The game was to be based on the Second Battle of Fallujah that occurred in late 2004. It was estimated that around 110 coalition fighters were killed, 6 times as many wounded, and around 800 civilians also perished. So when 6 Days of Fallujah was shown off in 2009, which was subjectively maybe not the best of timing, the game received an avalanche of negative reception from the press, anti-war groups, and the families of the victims. Even veterans of the battle that were helping develop the game voiced their justifications, but that still wasn't enough to stop the vultures from circling. And as a result, Konami ended up pulling out of the deal, leaving the game without a publisher, and soon after, the developers had no choice but to can the project. That's all the stories I wanted to share, so now it's time to provide a conclusion. I'll try not to get too patriotic. Naturally, humanity has a tradition of pointing out negative benefits when something really fresh bursts out on the scene. You know, Elvis Presley was slandered by the conservative side of America for his exploitive movement on stage. Newspaper was criticized for disrupting social interaction. So inevitably, it would make sense that when a groundbreaker like Mortal Kombat turned up, the vocal reaction would have been exactly the same. Some people just struggle to keep up with the times. I'm kind of guilty of that as well, I guess. But I think today, thanks to the rise of social media and the increasing accessibility of journalism, it's given certain individuals a platform that makes them come across a lot more local than they really are. But to me, the beauty of video games is always been the sheer variety. There's certain genres that I'm into and there's certain ones I'm just not. But it's just a real frustration for gamers to have people complain about games that they like in a way that they don't establish its divine purpose.
You're going into a civilian house, essentially, and granted they are terrorists, but it's still weird.
If the headline coming out of this was, you can play this game non-lethally, I think that would have, if that had been tacked onto the end of that demo, like that would have really changed my opinion of it.
I felt uncomfortable.
And maybe they'll fall flat on their face, and this game's gonna end up being offensive to anyone who's served in the military. I mean, it's my game of the show.
And Cooper, have you ever played Mass Effect?
No.
So you have no frame of reference here, Donnie. You're like a child who wanders into the middle.